Hi everyone, I'm Paige Abbott, registered psychologist in the province of Alberta, and today I am going to be talking to the fawners out there, which really is just a fancy word for people pleasing. Stay tuned. So today I'm talking about fawning. How many of you have actually heard of that word? Probably you might have heard of it in the context in which I'm going to speak, which is you may have heard of the common responses to crisis or emergency of fight or flight. You may have heard of the more recent adaptation of that, which is fight, flight, or freeze. Well, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn is the most updated version of the different responses that people can have to conflict, to crisis, and to emergency situations. The fighters, they're the ones that want to get right in there, action oriented, let's fix this, let's do this. Basically, they're running on adrenaline to try and fix and address whatever is going on in the situation around them. The flighters are the people who are going, this is really uncomfortable, this is scary, let's just get the heck out of here. So turning and running. The freezers are the deer in the headlights. Oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, where to go. They just stop. Their system is literally overloaded and they can't think, they can't act, they can't react, they just literally freeze. So who are the fawners? The fawners are the people who often have been exposed to environments growing up where there was quite a bit of trauma, conflict, potentially abuse amongst the people who are closest to them. So often this is care providers, but it could also be siblings, friends, teachers, people who are in the network where they have learned to respond. So the fawners are the people who want to make everything okay. So they smile a lot, they joke a lot, they try and make the situation comfortable as an adaptation strategy. They know that in those moments of crisis, trauma, abuse, that it's a really uncomfortable and really tense situation. So the fawners have learned how to, in some ways, diffuse that situation for themselves as well as for others. Really, when you think about it, it is a somewhat helpful coping mechanism. However, if this is the foundational way that people are learning to relate to the world, that is going to carry forward with them into adult relationships, and that's where it can start to become more problematic. It can be problematic in younger years as well, because for the fawner, they have fallen into a people-pleasing and caretaking pattern. So this can be some of those early signs and symptoms of what we can also call codependency. Taking so much care of other people, being so attuned to their thoughts, their feelings, their needs, that you actually start to disconnect and forget about your own. So there's always a consequence for the fawner. It just may not be super obvious, especially in younger years, because parents, guardians, caregivers may just think, okay, this kid is happy, they're okay, their needs are met, not appreciating that the fawner has learned to silence their needs, to silence their voice, to just make everyone else around them happy. So that can be on big things, and it can also be down to the smallest details of life. Hey, little person, what do you want for dinner? Whatever we're having is great by me. They don't want to stir the pot. They don't want to activate any potential for conflict. Obviously, again, as we move this pattern into adulthood, the fawner is now out in the world trying to relate, engage, go to school, go to work, have romantic and friendships, and just build a life for themselves. So what problems can the fawner run into? Well, unfortunately, they can run into a lot of problems. Often a fawner may find themselves picking friends, picking romantic partners who replicate some of those abusive and conflictual patterns that they're used to from their younger years. The reality is that we go to what we know. So even if it's something that we know isn't healthy, it's still familiar and therefore going to be slightly more comfortable than change, than difference. So now the fawner may find themselves in similarly abusive or conflictual or traumatic relationships, both friendship, romantic, and otherwise, including in their professional and their collegial environments, which obviously sets up them to continue in that fawning behavior, which further disconnects the fawner from themselves. So as time goes on, they're losing more and more connection with who they are, what they need, what they value, and how to insert that into the conversation and into the relationship. So how does one heal from being a fawner? Some people wonder, is this just an instinctual thing that they're going to be stuck with for the rest of their lives? And I would say absolutely not. Once you are aware of this fawning behavior and pattern, what you can start to do is to take steps for health, development, and recovery. What are some of those steps? Step number one would be developing a closer and more honest connection with your emotional world. A lot of fawners benefit from a daily feelings reflective practice. So literally taking some time to sit with themselves in the day and asking themselves, what feelings have been coming up today, or how have I been feeling? They may want to supplement this with using a feelings wheel or a feelings list just to provide that emotional vocabulary. Again, fawners have often learned over years and years of practice to disconnect from their feelings. So when you ask a fawner initially how they're feeling, probably what you'll get back are very few answers. I'm okay, I'm fine, it's all good, but there won't be any connection deeper than that. And even the fawner themselves in their own time may not have much connection deeper than that. So the first step is just opening up the door to allow those feelings to be more visible and more heard, because these feelings set the stage for informing our boundaries. As the fawner starts to become more connected with their feelings, the next step would be to start to exert preferences in their daily life. And I encourage people to do this in the small things, not the big things to start. So much like strength training, you don't want to start off by going and trying to pick up a 100-pound weight when you've never lifted a weight before. You want to start with 1 pound or 2 pounds and start building up some strength. It's the same thing with emotional health and mental health. We need to start with the small things to build up comfort, to learn discomfort tolerance. So to actually learn how to be okay when we're uncomfortable, because fawners, like many other people who have other mental health or addiction related symptoms, have come to just have this push to minimize and avoid discomfort and pain. Now, I want to clarify that being a fawner isn't necessarily a mental health or an addiction-related symptom. I'm simply just drawing the parallel that all of these things are driven by a fundamental human desire to avoid discomfort. And therefore, part of health and recovery is learning how to be uncomfortable with slight discomfort. Obviously, no one needs to be comfortable with, again, abuse or trauma or overt, like palpable discomfort that you almost can't bear. That's not what we're talking about here, but being able to tolerate the discomfort that comes with change. Because challenging ourselves to do the healthier next step, let's face it, is uncomfortable, and we need to learn how to be okay with that. So for fawners, starting to learn how to exert more preferences in their space. So choosing products that they like, going shopping and maybe picking different articles of clothing than they normally would that are maybe more in alignment with some of those true feelings or true interest. Even just starting to explore different things. If you really don't know what you like and what your preferences are, experiment, explore, try different activities, go to different places, use different products, experiment with them, come back, check in on the feelings, and those will start to inform what you like, what you don't like, and what your preferences are. As that practice starts to build up and become more comfortable, then the fawner can start to take that on the road to the bigger parts of life. So starting to be more assertive and more vocal about their needs, their preferences, and their boundaries in all of their domains. So whether that's at school, at work, with loved ones, with friends, people just randomly in environments where they're interacting, wherever you go, being able to be more forthcoming with pointing out injustices, correcting mistakes, asking for what you need and prefer, and just inserting your voice into the conversation. This is obviously the complete opposite of what the fawner has learned and been programmed to do, and hence the reason it can be very scary and very uncomfortable. And therefore, the fawner will benefit from additional support. They may already have people in their lives who are a support and kind of a champion for that change and unconditionally there to help them in their journey. And or they may need to add in some professional support. So starting to talk to some healthcare providers to have that accountability and to have that extra voice in the mix, to provide suggestions, to provide support, to provide affirmations of the steps that the fawner is taking to move from that fawning, caretaking, people-pleasing way of behaving to assertiveness, being more connected with self, and having boundaries. I hope it sounds possible. It definitely is possible. The first step is awareness. So really being able to acknowledge and own that pattern of acting and reacting and recognize where it's come from. So recognize that this isn't a core part of you. You likely are a very kind, loving, and compassionate person. However, that's gone too far. So even the most kind, caring, and compassionate of people still need to be attuned with their own feelings, their own values, their own preferences, and they need to have boundaries. So that's what the healing process involves, is pulling these behaviors back in to that healthy domain where, yes, you are a kind, compassionate, loving individual, but you're also aware of what your boundaries are, what your needs are, and what your preferences are, and you can speak those in your daily life. Now, the fawner may find, because of the replication of some of these abusive and traumatic patterns throughout their lives, that as they start to do this, the people around them may not react well. This is almost to be anticipated to a certain extent because the fawner has usually amalgamated towards people who may be more aggressive and more in need of that fawning response. So when they're getting perceived pushback, the person on the receiving end of that isn't going to be happy. This is where the fawner can start to be in a position where some difficult decisions need to be made. When some people in their lives are unhappy and pushing back against the fawn's changes that they're making, the fawner will need to make some choices of, do I stay in this relationship? Is there potential here for change and acceptance to the new version of yourself? The version who is more clear, more assertive, and has boundaries? Or is that just not possible? So there can be some relationship shifting in the fawner's world as they're moving into this healthy state of assertiveness, boundaries, and openness. That's very uncomfortable. However, over time, you will start to find that you gravitate towards new people, different people, and people who are more in alignment with your preferences and your true self. And that's really what it means to heal from this reactive pattern, because that's all that it is. It's a ingrained kind of trauma-based response to just wanting to function and adapt in our world. Moving from that reactive response to a response that's better suited to our current environment, circumstances, and needs, which is one of, we're certainly not going to tolerate abuse or ongoing kind of crisis and drama and trauma. We're going to be assertive. We're going to be clear on our boundaries and our needs and move away from situations that aren't in alignment with those. So it's a very powerful thing. And I'm sure that many of you watching can relate maybe to parts of this. Maybe you relate to being a fawner, just maybe not to the extent that it's taken over your life. But even so, if you recognize some patterns of fawning in your life, it's still worth then looking at those steps of recovery, of starting to build that connection with your inner emotional world, starting to play around with identification of preferences, and then moving towards communication of your preferences and your needs in the world around you. Thank you so much for watching and your interest in personal growth and healing your mental health and your emotional world. I wish you all of the best in your ongoing journey, and stay tuned for upcoming episodes. I have no idea what I'm going to offer. It really depends on what I'm hearing from the clients that I'm working with and where inspiration strikes. So I'm curious too. Stay tuned. Bye for now.